Good morning, everyone, and thanks for tuning in to this webinar where we ask the question, is it real green or greenwashing? My name is Hege Østmo, and I am Head of Partnerships and Brand at the Nobel Peace Center in Oslo, where we are broadcasting from today. This seminar is part of the Real Business series, which we are hosting in partnership with Hydro. And Real Business is an arena for discussion on how the business sector and other sectors play a real part in building viable, sustainable, and more peaceful societies. Our ambition is to address important issues, talk frankly about the dilemmas, and bring forward new perspectives on how business and society can contribute to solving some of the big challenges that we face today. Leading us through this webinar today is Bjørn Haugland. He is the CEO of Shift Business Climate Leaders, and Shift is a business-led climate initiative with the mission to accelerate the transition to a low-carbon economy and support government in delivering on its national climate commitments by 2030. Bjørn is also a former Executive Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer of DNVGL Group. So Bjørn, I am looking very much forward to the discussions, and I hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to the Nobel Peace Center and Hydro for putting this debate together. Greenwashing or real green? I think that's a very crucial question as the world is ahead of a big transformation to a safe and sustainable future. So today we will basically look at two perspectives. We will look at the role of business in order to produce and promote products in a way that give end user consumers good and real information about the sustainable performance of the product and services. And we will also look at this from the regulator side. So how can regulators facilitate this transition and create an environment that enable those businesses who are real sustainable to thrive and to develop in the transition. And the context for the dialogue today is obviously the broad transition to sustainability through UN Sustainable Development Goals, through the EU Green Deal, through the EU Circular Economy Action Plan, EU Sustainable Product Initiatives, and a lot of national regulations. Here in Norway, we got our circular economy strategy yesterday. We got last week an energy plan, and also this spring a climate plan. So we have a lot of frameworks pointing us in the right direction, but still it is up to us in the business sector to really look at the opportunities on how we can move forward and be part of this acceleration, which is needed in order for all of us to reach the overall goals. We will, through the seminar, also launch some polls for you. So I think you should just keep an eye in the chat. And we will very much like you to contribute to those polls, and we will all of us take a look at them by end of the webinar. So, in order to give introduction to the theme, it is a great honor and pleasure to introduce my friend, Dr. Martin Porter. Martin is the Executive Chair of Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership. He is really an international recognized voice within the field of sustainability, And Martin, I understand you have just launched a report with some interesting findings. So please share your insights and maybe end your speech with a small challenge to us in the panel. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you, Bjorn, and thank you to everyone organising this for the invitation and the opportunity to speak to you this morning from Brussels. I'm sorry I can't be with you in person, but I look forward to participating for the full hour nonetheless. I'm pleased to do so, as you say, because we've done some work recently in this area. But if I can say why I'm particularly happy to be with you right now, it's that the approach that CISL in Brussels and in Cambridge takes to trying to solve these problems and help demonstrate leadership in this area is through a combination of research, analytics, education, but very much a collaborative approach, bringing together policymakers, businesses and other stakeholders. And this type of discussion today exemplifies, I think, the need for that type of approach. It is also at the same time, as you indicated, perhaps even more urgent than ever, certainly more apparent how urgent it is to make progress on these issues. And the gap between the expectations of emissions reduction for climate purposes, as well as other sustainability goals, and the reality that we see on the ground still needs to be closed and rapidly. And of course, in Europe in particular, you mentioned the European Green Deal. We need to be able to demonstrate that the policy leadership that has been shown and the business leadership that is being shown translates into practice, into the emissions reduction, that customers and consumers can feel this themselves and see this in practice. So if I can turn to a study which we've done, which I hope will set the scene well here. This is not a study that looks specifically at greenwashing, but I think it does talk to many of the reasons why we need to ensure that that does not happen and how to avoid this happening. And it looks in particular at the subject of how to tackle emissions from materials, as well as the energy-related emissions that are involved in producing and distributing materials in final products. This was a study that we undertook and published recently with the Agora Energiewende, a well-known German-based think tank. And that think tank has also moved recently to focus not just on energy, but also materials and other related issues. And this study, I think, is a good example of how many people now are looking at the challenge of industrial decarbonization in a way which addresses both not just the production side of the challenge, but also the demand side, how to create markets that draw through the sorts of very low carbon, climate neutral materials into the consumer domain as rapidly and cost effectively as possible. And this study sought to look at how that might be done, and did so by discussing with a number of policymakers, but also businesses who are faced with this challenge, and try to understand what the recommendations would be for policymakers if they were to try to enable that as quickly as possible, specifically in Europe and under the European Green Deal context that you mentioned. I won't go into the details of all of the organizations and companies we spoke to, but it was in the areas of metals, steel, aluminium, in the areas of cement, chemicals, and obviously forestry and biomaterials products as well. So we covered a whole range of different materials in looking at this challenge. So what are the policies that we identified in this study that should be prioritized now, we think, by policymakers? Well, we identified three, and if we can move to the next slide. The first of these, we think, is the priority to ensure that we have a way of agreeing and tracking life cycle embedded emissions that are found in final products, so that we know how many emissions have been associated with them from the moment that the materials are mined, processed and turned into that final manufactured product. With that type of measure, companies at each stage of the value chain would have incentives to eliminate the emissions associated with the materials right up to the final producer. And that will enable a set of options to all and choices made by companies back up the supply chain in order that they choose the best and most effective way to eliminate the emissions at that stage. regulatory limits in particular on the final product embedded material emissions would drive this in much the same way as other regulatory limits have driven emissions reductions, for example, from cars. And we see this, therefore, as a powerful means of transforming emissions from materials in final products. So that's the first recommendation. The second would be that a methodology to calculate this would be used and agreed and commonly shared for downstream producers, so that they could also know and illustrate and publicize the extent to which their own materials were reaching particular standards. And in this way, we would be able to not just incentivize higher performance standards by different producers of materials, but also, particularly important for the discussion here today, if properly enforced and used and applied, not just by businesses and policymakers, but also referred to by customers and ultimately consumers, this would be a contribution to avoiding the risk of greenwashing, because it would help to eliminate the chances of false claims, inaccurate claims, because there would be a commonly agreed reference point. So we need to make sure that work is undertaken, further developed, to make sure that these methodologies and schemes are set up to become applicable as soon as possible. This would also, of course, we think, and I'm sure others would agree, help grow the demand for these materials as well. And clearly we need to incentivize that so that the markets grow at the pace that they should to eliminate emissions. And if I move on to the third area, this is specifically to ensure that these relatively small markets at the moment are grown as quickly as possible by other incentives at the early stage of the commercialization of them. There are various ideas that are now in circulation that could enable these materials to be stimulated at that stage, some of which link to the role of public procurement, for example, where large government schemes could apply high standards and create a large initial market which would pull through these materials at greater pace than they would otherwise be. There are possibilities to introduce quotas for particular circular materials, for example, and carbon contracts for difference. Various ideas. These must be looked at with a priority now, but also, importantly, only in a time-limited way. They are obviously something that needs to be introduced at the early stage of the marketing of these products, and should be removed to avoid distortions once they have had their desired effect. So, in conclusion, we see that these three areas need to be prioritized to work on together to stimulate new markets for these materials. This is all, of course, in addition to the other policies and other work which is being done through things like carbon pricing and all of the process technology improvements that businesses and policymakers are also looking to ensure receive the right support and progress rapidly as well. But in looking at this with much more attention under the Green Deal, the Sustainable Products Initiative, we think there is a strong case now for collaborative effort between leading businesses, between policymakers who are looking for ideas and support on these issues, and of course other stakeholders to provide input to make sure that we set the right standards, we agree this process on as wide a basis as possible, and we can therefore see these materials and products enter the market and therefore give both satisfaction to consumers and businesses, but also achieve obviously our sustainability goals and in particular climate neutrality objectives. So with that, I hope that helps set the scene, and I look forward to hearing the panelists discuss this and to remain involved in the hour's discussion. Thank you.
Martin, thank you so much for this holistic and very precise overview of this theme. And we will bring you back into the dialogue when you have listened to the discussion here and also seen the results of our polls. And the first poll will be launched in the chat now. And the question is greenwashing slowing down the green transition? So please join us and we will look at the results by end of the dialogue here today. It's then a great pleasure for me to introduce a very competent panel with me. So I will start with Doreen Fredrigo. She is the Industrial Transformation Policy Coordinator at the Climate Action Network, CAN. Doreen, nice to have you here. Lynn Jacobsen Hammer is a former colleague and Sustainability Manager of DNV. Welcome.
Thank you.
Per Hynne is well known for many of you, is Head of Public Affairs, Communication and Sustainability in Coca-Cola European Partners of Norway. Welcome, Per.
Thank you.
Hilde Kallevik is Vice President and Head of Global Brand and Marketing in Hydro. Welcome.
Thank you.
And last but not least, Tom Johnson is the Environmental Counselor Mission of Norway to EU. Welcome, Tom. So I would like to start with Doreen. I always like to start with the activists, because I think you can also bring some challenges into the question. And our first perspective is to look at the business side of this. Normally businesses like to point to regulators to say, you should do. But within the field of greenwashing, production, promoting products, what do you think businesses can do in order to, get more grip on this? And in my opinion, also build more trust to all the stakeholders. So, Doreen, what's your view on this?
So you can't expect that I won't talk a bit about European legislation, because I think this is a key part of what we need to talk about today. And as we've already heard twice already this morning about the Sustainable Products Initiative. So what I think, on the one hand, if I'm looking at a lot of the business campaigns and groupings that are developing around net zero or climate neutrality, there's a very interesting one, which I won't mention specifically, but it interestingly moves beyond the technological, and it actually talks about engaging in making society climate neutral. And so I think there are two things that particularly companies can do. One is engage very much progressively, proactively, and ambitiously with the opportunities that are coming, especially in the EU Sustainable Product Initiative. The EU, the European Commission, has been trying for 20 years to work on products, and it hasn't succeeded yet. And this time we really need to make it, and we need to make it strong. So please get engaged. Please come and talk to organizations like CAN Europe. The second thing you can do is try and integrate into the DNA of the company. So not just the marketing, not just the messaging, but into the DNA of the company, all of that kind of environmental objectives, not just on climate. And that's maybe strange to hear that coming from somebody from a climate organization. But I come at this from the industrial transformation side, not the industrial decarbonization purely. Companies need to look at their products, how they're making them, their production processes, and their business models. How are they getting value out of their activities? Is it purely trying to sell more and more, or is it looking at alternative ways of getting that value out of a system? That's what I would say for now.
Okay, thank you so much. And I would just love to pass that challenge on to you, Hilde. You're sitting in the middle of the business side, and I thought she was speaking to you and Per maybe in particular, but Hilde, what is your reflections?
Yes. Well, thank you, Doreen. I was just making a note of your 2 points here, and I couldn't agree with you more. And it's clear today that the biggest challenge for production and mass production, of course, is sustainability. We need to produce with low emissions, and we need to produce for a circular economy. But of course, it goes beyond climate. If we talk about materials, every material has a history. And that, of course, also include people, the environment and the planet. So to understand that total life cycle part of production is key. But I think the good news is that we do have a lot of the technology and knowledge that is needed today. What I think is the biggest challenge in accelerating this shift is, well, there are many things, but I like to highlight a few things. One is the demand for greener products, and also to know how to demand greener products. So I'll come back to that. And then the second one is a mindset in production and in consumption. And I think if we manage to solve those two problems, I think we can come a long way. So those are the 2 points that I think requires, of course, close collaboration. And this is where greenwashing comes in as a real problem. And I will give one example of a big issue that we have that I believe is representative for materials. Because materials, I think, roughly 1/4 of the energy used in the world is used in producing materials. So you can see that there's a huge upside, you know, if we cut the energy or if we transform the energy into renewable sources, we can cut a lot of emissions. But the problem is that it's difficult to know what is a good material from a sustainability point of view. And one example is this. Aluminium is very energy intensive in the making. So it actually matters where and how aluminium is produced. And of course, it requires, you know, not everybody can be an engineer and knows this. So thankfully, you know, in Europe now, manufacturers of cars and electronics, you know, what have you, they are actually now starting to demand greener products. And recycled content is become a little bit the holy grail, which is great. The problem is, the fun fact of the day is that recycled is not always good for the environment. And let me give you an example. Some European aluminium producers, they do want, of course, to please their customers. And it's difficult to get enough post-consume. So aluminium that has been in use, like cans, for example, or an old bicycle. So what some people do, or some companies do, is they import aluminium from China. From the production sites, it's scrap, it's never been in use, and it's been produced by coal power. Imported into Europe, remelted, recycle it, it's true, it is recycled, and sell it as 100% recycled aluminium. The problem with this is this actually increases the CO2 emissions in Europe. Not dramatically, but it actually increases this. So as a manufacturer, you can buy recycled aluminium, you can think it's good, but it actually contributes to increase greenhouse gas emissions. And this is a problem we need to solve.
And Lynn, this must be something DNV is also looking into, I guess, because you are making standards, and those standards should enable businesses to improve their performance. And if recycle is not always good, how can we work with that?
A good question. And you're totally right. We don't only make standards or initiate the best practice in an industry, but we are a classification and a certification company as well. And a lot of industries come to us because it is not necessarily a standard for how to do things in their business, so we can assist them in that. But there is also quite a lot of international standards, and the EU Green Deal is coming with a lot of packages and standards. The regulators are really speeding up the requirements to the companies. So I think how can a company work good with this is to actually understand what is hitting them. And as the Sustainable Development Goals, the purpose of the goals is for everybody to contribute. And for us to contribute even more than just keeping us sustainable tomorrow, we need to understand how we can help. And then we need to look at other sources for information, both on what are actually happening in the countries where materials are produced, because this will become the company's responsibility. The company will have a total responsibility of the entire value chain when it comes to all the reporting that is being required. So it's important that a company understand how everything they do affects the environment, how everything they do affects the social area, and then take this into account when they create their strategy. And I encourage companies to actually do this, because it's not only a tiresome or a cumbersome process, but it can bring good strategic purposes. It can build culture in a company, and you can actually understand how risks can turn into opportunities. So I think there's a great opportunity in this landscape, and I'm really happy to see that the regulators are coming with more and more standards so that we get a common way to work, and also on the reporting side, because on the reporting side, that will give requirements to the strategic side and how to implement this in the companies.
So what I hear is that you agree with Doreen, that businesses need to engage more.
Yes.
But I'm not sure if you are precisely answering, Hilde, the need to
for the
decide,
circularity.
Recycle. Is recycling always good, or is it, like Hilde said, areas where we need to look at a broader picture to basically understand the total, in this case, emission?
Yes, and I think that's a company's responsibility to actually go beyond, to actually go back to the ones who produced and ask, how did you actually produce this? What kind of energy source did you use when you produced it? So not take it for granted that this is actually recycled, but ask the right questions, and not stop at that. Be persuasive, get the information you need, because you are at the end responsible for it. So that means that you need to take that approach and really go into the deep.
Thank you. A company which I have seen myself, really doing what you are saying, is Coca-Cola. 2 years ago, I was part of your kind of European meeting, where you invited NGOs all over Europe to challenge you on these issues. So Per, tell us more about how you are working with these issues, and I think in a sense many of the things Hilde pointed on is also relevant for what you are doing. Please.
Thank you, Björn. Absolutely. I could be talking for a while then. It's a big question. We're a big company with an enormous footprint, obviously, in many ways. So, and it's really interesting this discussion about what is the best solution. And I guess that's a challenge, because we have huge ambitions, because we need to move faster, and we need to move bold, and to get there, we don't know the solutions yet. So we're making that change as we move along. But as you say, Lynn, we need to have these ambitions. We need to go beyond. We need to stretch. And as a company, we have a responsibility to drive the change. So hence, we need to invest in new technology. We need to test out new solutions. Sometimes we hit right. Sometimes we're challenged on that. So that's the first one. The other one is, I think, in the discussion from Doreen and the input, to engage with society. Obviously, as the world's biggest brand, most known brand, we have a responsibility to use the strength of our brand to communicate and to engage. And then we easily get into that discussion on greenwashing again, because what is right and what are we doing just to promote ourselves, or what are we doing to try to engage the society, our consumers, to make the right choice? And I think consumers are in a very difficult position, because it's really hard for them to understand what is the right packaging, what is the right solution, what is the right service, because it's just not, they're not able to understand all the discussions going on in media and all the debates. This is the best one, this is the best one. And I think we have a good example in Norway now, where we are one of the first countries moving into 100% recycled PET, so plastic, in our bottles. That's a big step forward, reducing a lot of emissions from our production in Norway. At the same time, then we are challenged, because we are kind of challenging the system, because there's not enough recycled plastic available, as you say. And at the same time, if we move too slow, then we're challenged because we're moving too slow. So in the US, they're challenged because they only say we're going to do 20% recycled PET. Then that's greenwashing. We're not doing what we need to do. And then consumers get confused. So it's a big open landscape. But I agree, we need to engage, and I think our company has set at least a standard internally, because we have that in our DNA, and we understand that we need to. The risks are too high if we don't, for the planet, for the society, and for us as a business.
And I think, from my view, also working with the topic of greenwashing, I think it is so important for the business side to really take responsibility themselves, because this is all about trust. And I think trust is all about, you know, how you build your competitive advantages. So I think it's a big upside here. But already to this extent, we have heard from Hilde that recycling is not always good, and from Per that, you know, we are really doing recycles on bottles. So I think your point, which both of you are also saying, that it's not that easy for a consumer always to understand this. So I think that means that it's also a need for businesses to work proactively with this. I will a short comments from Hilde, and then we will listen to Tom. But please, Hilde.
I just want to say that recycling is not always good for the environment as the definition of recycling is today. But perhaps it could have been solved if we had defined recycled in another way.
Yes, and that challenge we put to Lynn. I think
Yes.
DNV is such, you are working with so many companies all over the world, and I think you have a particular role, like other standard setters, to help businesses to clarify, you know, what is recycling and what is the standards to be done. So here you got a challenge for us. And Tom, welcome from Brussels.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. I guess you are into many of these discussions more or less every day with in this borderline between regulators, governments, and businesses. So share with us your reflection of what you have heard so far, and maybe you can also, like Doreen, give a challenge to the business sector on how they can go forward. So please.
Yeah, I think it's very important to just highlight that the Green Deal is going on. There are so many regulatory initiatives that will be put forward from the Commission in the next couple of months, really. It's in a very exciting time where a lot of things are happening. So I can mention, you know, the taxonomy is being developed with the delegated acts concerning other issues than just the climate adaptation and mitigation. Of course, very important to our conversation is the regulatory initiative on green claims, which will be out later this year. I think something that hasn't been mentioned, but that I think is really important, is that the Commission is also working on a certification system for carbon removals. Not only carbon footprint of products, but actually that carbon removal credits that are offered on the market in the future will actually have integrity. Climate integrity. That's really it's a new horizon. It's a new market, so that's going to be really important. What I never heard, I think, explicitly mentioned was that we actually have a Green Deal regulatory proposal right now. It's called the battery regulation, and it aims to regulate the environmental footprint, so to say, of batteries from cradle to grave to rebirth. So it starts with the due diligence, it continues with regulating the life cycle emissions or the footprint. It's about how much recycled materials you should use in new batteries in year X. It's also about how you should publicly procure, for instance, vehicles with batteries, so that you can actually not only, an EV is not necessarily an EV. There are, better EVs than other ones because the carbon footprint of the battery is lower. Yeah, that's. I mean, the battery regulation is such a great blueprint for what we're discussing right now. And if I was to challenge you, I mean, you are talking about proactively taking part in the conversation right now, and I think it's really important that you make the public aware, and you point, the discussions should be pointed towards the regulatory initiatives that are happening right now, and pushing, I guess, public authorities to actually have progressive stance on these files, because at the end of the day, it's going to be the member states of the EU that's going to decide a lot on how the regulatory initiatives will look like in the end. And of course, I wasn't going to navel gaze, so I was very happy that you, Björn, mentioned the Norwegian government's circular economy strategy. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you so much also for that challenge, and I think that can be emphasized broadly. Also, the business role to take a stand in the public debate, and I think this kind of seminars put together by Nobel Peace Center and Hydro is exactly that. I think businesses can be more outspoken also in the public debate about these issues, taking part of the transition. But Doreen, you challenged us, so a few reflections on what you have heard so far, and then I will also hear more about your reflections on how regulators can, enable a better environment for businesses to accelerate the transition. Please.
Yeah, no, I think it's been interesting listening to the different views, let's say, and the different angles being taken. I think what particularly strikes me is that although companies are individually trying themselves to green their products or improve their production processes, and sometimes fixing these public objectives of, let's say, 100% recycled whatever material, the reality is, I think a lot are still struggling in a vacuum, because we don't have structure. We don't have something that is saying explicitly, and here I come back again to EU legislation, this is where sustainable policy or products should be heading. These are the kinds of things that we need to take into consideration. And that also includes holding two sometimes or multiple opposing issues. Do we balance more towards climate? Do we balance more towards the types of materials that we're using because some are more easily recyclable than others? It's not easy to do, not only just in a kind of regulatory or public policy vacuum, but also in a societal vacuum. What I see sometimes, and I find it quite fascinating to watch what kinds of issues come up on the consumer agenda. Okay, suddenly, no, we don't want this particular substance, chemical substance in our products. No, we don't want to have this material. And I don't know, I think it must feel a bit, being a company, being in a ping pong game, being batted back and forth between different issues. And so I think the more structured an approach a company can take. So as we've heard, looking across the whole range of environmental impacts a company can make, the more structured an approach that gets taken into a company's strategy and business case, and then publicly communicated, realizing that you then stray quite quickly or quite easily into the greenwashing. So I sympathize to a certain extent, but I also place a lot of responsibility for the EU not having done this in the late 90s on certain parts of industry, let's say, who didn't want it because what they saw was innovation was being stifled and that was going to kill profits.
Thank you. And I think what Doreen say, Hilde, is play well with your thoughts, but because I guess that some of your competitors selling recycled products, maybe with a higher carbon intensity than yourself, may get some benefit in the marketplace. So.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, I have to say, of course, Hydro, we're a company, we're represented in the whole value chain. Aluminium starts with mining, and of course, every material, as I said, has a history, and there's a lot of things to discuss about, mining in the rainforest too. So I'm not going to say that we are better than the rest in every aspect, but where I do believe that my company and other companies as well, that I would say are leading the way. It's back to what was said by Martin. It's the DNA aspect. Is that that we do feel a responsibility for extracting and mining and producing in a responsible way, and this is really embedded in our organization, which I think is important. But I have to say, back to what Doreen is saying, is that we also have, of course, we need to earn money. And we are in a competitive landscape here and now. It's about next quarter, next year, and as responsible for marketing, I hear this every day. But why can't we say, our salespeople say, but I'm faced every day with customers who say, oh, your competitors are offering me 100% recycled, or they are offering me this carbon footprint that is half of what you're offering. Why can't we also calculate in this way? And then we say, no, we can't calculate in this way because we are calculating the whole value chain, from mining, transportation, production, refining, into the end product. But the reality is that we in some markets are actually losing business because of this. Mm-hmm. And then what to do? And of course, I'm very proud to say that I do believe that we are doing the right thing. We are not, and we're spending a lot of time educating our salespeople to say that, but you should turn this to your advantage. You should say to your customers, but from us, you're getting the full picture, and in the long run, this will help you. But of course, and we are a large organization, 35,000 people, I'm sure that we are doing greenwashing as well. I'm sure there are customer meetings where our salespeople as well are tempted, to say, but yeah, we will give you this and it's 100% or whatever. But so I would say that my challenge to the regulator is that we need to make sure that this isn't too slow, because it's here and now. This is where the competition is today, so we can make a change.
And you are welcoming somehow more fair regulatory framework, which enable everybody kind of to compete on the same premises. How about you, Per? I know you have been, again, working a lot with regulators.
Yes, we have been working with regulators to try to get up structure on taxes to drive the change into recycled material. It's a fiscal tax today, so it's hard for them to change it because they will lose the money. But I think that discussion on competition and collaboration is really interesting, and it's challenging, obviously. So we're part of a small category. We're big in volume, but there's not that many players. But obviously we use what we do, the investments that we do, trying to use it to our advantage towards our customers, which is the grocery business, and consumers. But at the same time, we see when we drive the change and make some bold decisions, then that challenge the category. And then there's a competition fight that is only solved by collaboration. And then where structure comes in and could help us, but then structure takes too long time to get on board, and we need to drive faster. So it's not easy. But I guess our point of view is that if we have high ambitions, and to get there, we need to make some bold decisions. that may and bring us into a territory that is a bit unknown, but we need to go there because otherwise it will, it will take too much time.
And I kind of hear from both of you that it's not necessarily perfect everything we are doing, but you know to strive all the time to improve and to be honest and to be transparent is probably what is the key also in the work, both to consumers but also towards regulators.
We have to be transparent and open, otherwise it will hit us so hard the next day if we fail on that. So we have to include everybody, but it's still a competition, and we need to make the money, as you say, Hilde, and just try to balance that out in the right way.
Lynn, I guess this is kind of music in your ears.
Yes, it is, and I think it's absolutely correct. The competition situation is very hard. It doesn't necessarily compare apple to apple, and I think that's something that the EU Green Deal can help with. And I think Tom is absolutely right that we will experience that a lot of things are going to change, and a lot of regulatory will actually help the companies in setting these boundaries and comparing the right things to the right things. And I also think that the verification of the information going out is also an important part of this. So when the reporting requirements from the EU is coming, it's also a mandatory verification function in there. So somebody else is also looking into the cards of the company to say, yes, this is actually correct and it's according to the regulators or the legislation that is for this area. So I think EU is on its way. It's just, it should have been, like Doreen said, in the 90s. But I think we're going to experience this from a very, very fast lane level, even though it doesn't experience it like this today. The investors, though, are on that lane. They are really, really working fast. And they are also getting more and more requirements as to what to invest in, and requirements for looking into how are the businesses working on the sustainability issues. So they are getting the demands first, and that will of course drop into the businesses. But I think the regulators, the verification part, and the investors' function is all going to sort of bring this into a balance at some point.
So Tom, it seems like you will have a lot to do in the coming years because you see the business sector represented here today. They really would like to see regulators helping to establish, more fair, more common frameworks, so businesses can compete on the real issues they are competing on, making effective and efficient production lines. Collaboration and not communication in terms of what is green and not green. So what is your take on that?
No, I think what I've heard has been inspiring, and of course we also collaborate with the business sector in many regards, both in Norway in domestic politics, but also here in Europe. And I also, well, I would like to, in the public consultation for the Green Claims initiative, it said there are now 457 voluntary environmental labels in the world. So it's incredibly important that we get the structure right. It will take some time, but there are so many initiatives in the pipeline right now. We don't have time to to go through them all. But what you haven't really mentioned a lot, and what the report, the CLG report, talked a lot about, is the demand side. And right now, the Commission has posted or publicized its draft guidelines for new state aid rules. And there you will have kind of a broader perspective than the current one, it seems, taking more into account the circularity of the products being supported. So that's really interesting. And speaking of the Norwegian government's circular economy strategy, they are also going into, like Per mentioned, how the taxes or the tax system can actually promote circular products or kind of promote environmentally friendly products or a way of producing.
Thank you so much. We are about to go into a landing, but before that, we will hear more from Martin. But before Martin, we will look at what is your opinion about the polls we have out there. So if we can get the first poll up on the screen. It was kind of maybe an obvious question, but I'm very happy to see that certainly greenwashing is a barrier in order to accelerate the green transition. So that was comforting to see. The next is pointing on the consumers. And definitely, at least from all of you joining us here today, it is clear that more than 50% take decision from a sustainability point of view. So that is also, Lynn and Per and Hilde, a good opportunity. Consumers want green products, but it must be real green. And as business, an even higher kind of share say that sustainability is an increasingly factor in deciding on design, purchasing, and manufacturing. And the last one, in your opinion, has your company ever made green claims that could be considered misleading or greenwashing product and services? And I think that is about half and half. And I think going back to you Hilde, just be real. Everything is not perfect. What it is important is to do a little bit better tomorrow than we do today, and to be honest about our challenges. So all in all, was that the last? Yes. All in all, I would say encouraging views from all of you, meaning that everybody which is occupied by doing real business and avoid greenwashing should have an increasing competitive advantage in the market. So Martin, are you still with us? Here you are. What do you think?
I am,
You have been listening to these experts from the business community and also from the regulatory side. What is your reflection on what you have seen and obviously also the polls?
No, it's fascinating and very interesting and encouraging discussion to a large degree. I think I've got three takeaways, I think, from my perspective. The first, very clearly, several people have mentioned how much the European Green Deal, the policy and legislative agenda is enormous, moving very quickly. And companies that have high ambition, are progressive, have the high standards themselves, have to engage in that to help that process achieve its objectives with the highest standards in place. So very important to engage. That's been mentioned several times by those companies, particularly with like-minded companies in other sectors as well as the same one as their own. So I think that's a clear takeaway from one perspective. The other, I think you mentioned the need for trust here to be enhanced in order to avoid the risk of greenwashing becoming a more serious problem. Transparency has also been mentioned. How do we build that? I think that the need for common rules, a common methodology for some of these calculations becomes abundantly clear. Several people have mentioned the need for that. So that is the way for everyone to have a common reference point and to work with that to ensure that their claims are based on a commonly agreed methodology and calculation system. So I think that is the way to enhance trust, a common methodology embedded in legislation, regulation, and so on. And the last, I think, is that this is obviously going to become, with good reason and very positively, sort of competitive sustainability. this is a way of for companies to secure competitive advantage now, and they will be doing that encouraged by the right rules. So fair competition will be encouraged by a common set of rules and regulations which stimulate innovation towards climate neutrality. So rules and regulation here are becoming the enabler of fair competition rather than of innovation, which 10 or 15 years ago was a common complaint, if you want. So I think it's interesting that we see companies that are leaders in their fields needing these rules in order to innovate and lead in their respective fields rather than being held back.
Thank you. And thank you for summarizing that, Martin. And before we close, I would like to challenge my panel, in the context of what we have heard now. And it is many businesses out there at different stage of the development. So if you should just give one tiny piece of advice, what is the most important thing to bring back to the leadership teams tomorrow in order to accelerate this transition? I start with you, Doreen. Very short, one piece of advice.
I would say, for the people who are actually designing the products and understand the processes, is be bold. Go for it. Go for it, not just in the narrow climate side, but looking broadly at the types of materials and also how the company is getting value out of the activities. And the second is at the higher level, at the CEO level, engage with national governments and especially with the EU to get positive messages out there about what is needed for that regulatory structure and the ambition that is needed.
Thank you. Be bold, engage. Hilda?
I will continue from there, and I fully agree with you, Doreen, and I say collaboration. Collaboration in the supply chain in order to make sure that on specific products or specific issues to understand that totality. That will be my
Thank
wish.
you. Per?
That would be always to bring what you're talking about back to the core of the business, because that's what's going to engage your employees, your leadership team, and those around you to build that credibility.
Stay to the core. Lynn?
Make sure you have a good overview of how you affect everything you do on the environment, on the social aspect and the governance structure, so you can create your strategy going forward.
Thank you. Tom?
Yes, I would like for companies to be specific, very specific with what they mean about what kind of issue. So a specific regulatory issue, what do they mean about it?
Martin?
I think I would agree with Doreen. Engage. Now is the moment to really, people like Tom, others who are working on these issues, to understand the detail, but also the big picture. So, get stuck in and make a difference. Now is the time to change things.
Okay, so then we challenge you, Martin. Your next report should kind of summarize these things. It's all about being bold, about engaging, collaborate, stay focused on core business, make sure you have a total overview, and be specific. So with those words, I would like to thank all my panelists here today. It has been a great pleasure of moderating this talk, and I would definitely thanks to the Nobel Peace Center and Hydro bringing this together. We have heard this through the talk, that the businesses also need to engage more in the public debate, and I think this initiative is all about that. And it is also all about real business, bringing business and society together. And I think this partnership between the Nobel Peace Center and Hydro is very powerful in doing so. And you will see more of real business going forward, so just stay tuned. And then finally, thank you to all of you listening here today, engaging in our polls. All the material will be available for you, including the presentations. So thank you so much for listening to us today. Thank you.